Hi, I'm Mimi Chan. Welcome to Culture Chat. Thanks for joining the conversation. Hi, everyone. Greg, Rucka, and I are back to discuss all sorts of fun things in this episode. We answer listener questions ranging from music to writing villains. I'm grateful to Greg for his generosity with his time and having these wonderful conversations with me each week. Thanks to all of you who have been encouraging and sending positive feedback. Keep your questions coming. Our next book club choice is Greg's very own Atticus Kodiak novels. We are reading Critical Space, Patriot Acts, and The Walking Dead, so read one or all of the above. We'd love some listener questions for our future episodes, so send them our way. For those that don't already know, Greg Rucka is a New York Times best-selling author of hundreds of comics and nearly 24 novels. He is also the writer for the hit film The Old Guard starring Charlize Theron. I'm loving these conversations and hope you are too. If you are, please rate my podcast on your platform of choice and share it. If you would like to help keep this podcast going and support with a donation, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com for as little as $1 per month. I would appreciate it. For comments or suggestions, email me at mimi@culturechatpodcast.com or reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Greg.
How are you, Mimi?
I am well. How are you? It's fine Thursday.
I'm okay. As we discussed in the pre-show social, I'm a little achy today. I don't know exactly what I did to my lower back. I did, however, discover what I'd done to my calves. I come from a long line of males who have very substantial calves, and when I was I know it's an odd thing to brag about. And
no, calves are good because it's genetic. Like you have it or you don't, so you have it to work with.
So yeah, I'd been really good about running the last couple of weeks, and then when I went out to New York to take Elliot, because I'm vegan, right? I have to take certain supplements, and I had forgotten to take my normal supplement, and so I picked up a different one. And then when I got back to Portland, right, I was in isolation, so I only had the stuff that I brought with me. And it turns out the one that I had picked up did not have magnesium.
Oh, yeah. Super important.
My calves, for some reason, were just like, what the hell are you doing, dude? I mean, they were just so tight, and it didn't matter how I was stretching them, and they were aching, and I was starting to get cramps in my toes. And I went to a friend of mine who does therapeutic massage, and they were working my calves, and they were like, oh my God, what's going on here? There's like constant muscle spasm, like microspasms. And have you been, you may be suffering a magnesium difficulty. So I got home, and of course I checked the bottle, and lo and behold, like no magnesium. And I was like,
yeah, that's for several weeks too. Yeah,
that was about 2 weeks I'd gone without. So it's much better now. And I am grateful, and my calves are starting to behave, but I'm looking forward to, I'm going to give myself the rest of the week. And then maybe this weekend, certainly on Monday, I will step back my running program and see if I can't do.
All right. Do you have a foam roller?
I have a large and a small. And see, that was the thing, is I had actually been rolling out. Boy, we have just gone into the fitness angle on this, which is something that you and I was going to say, you and I should be talking about this more. So I had actually, when I noticed the problem, I was like, okay, I got to do a better job of rolling these out. And I went through like the battery of roller treatment on the calves, and it wasn't doing anything. Like it felt better, but it was still hurting. And I rolled and I rocked, and I kept, I found pressure points. I kept, and it was still, and then it was like, oh yes, magnesium, that helps. So there you go. Everybody make sure you're taking your magnesium. And
yes, definitely take your magnesium.
You will be glad you did. And it's weird too, right? Because as going to be, now we're talking about Greg's health things. I'm vegan because I'm diabetic, right? It has nothing to do with the politics, which is not to say I do not absolutely agree with much of the politics surrounding veganism. But it's to say that I made the choice primarily as a health choice. And
Okay.
but the result of that combined with the diabetes is then that a lot of the other things that, all a lot of the other avenues for getting a lot of those vitamins and minerals are, shall we say, impaired. So yeah, the right supplement is
Yeah, so you
crucial.
take a lot of supplements. Yeah, I like Calm for
That was
magnesium.
what was recommended to me, but the problem with any
Yeah.
powder stuff is that it tends to have a high sugar content.
Right. I was just going to say, because it's got the little, like
Mm-hmm.
raspberry lemon flavor or whatever. But yeah, it's great. And it puts you right to sleep as well.
It's
Like
really calming.
you need to take, it's really calming. It's really calming. So I actually am not as regimented with that because it's at night and then I don't want to drink a bunch
Yeah.
at night because then I have to get up to the
Yep.
bathroom and it's a whole thing. But yes, Calm is really great. And I was going to tell you, because you were talking about, oh, your back is achy. And so sometimes a foam roller is awesome, but sometimes you need like a little bit more pinpoint. And we like to use like lacrosse
Uh-huh.
balls because it really kind of gives you that like pressure, and it's really nice, like kind of like a medium to hard pressure. So those are also fun fitness and
There you go.
myofascial release tips, everyone. All right.
Yeah, and
I'm sure our listeners are like,
yeah,
what
no,
is
wait,
going on
Maya,
today?
what? Yeah, yeah.
Oh my goodness. So we're going to jump into some listener questions today to
All right.
start us off nice and
Yeah,
easy. So
we're recording
like
a little earlier than we have the last
we are.
month and a half. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
So we're easing
slightly
in.
earlier.
Well, it's easier for me.
We're
It's
easing
like,
in.
12:30 your time. You're like, what the hell do
Yeah,
you want about Rucka?
exactly. But our very faithful listener, Brad
Hey,
PDX,
Brad.
wants to know what. Yeah, he wants to know what music we unwind to. Obviously, not together,
Oh,
but
well,
that
this
was the
is
question.
actually pretty good because I went. All right, so here's a little narrative. I don't know what part of town you're in, Brad. I'm in Northeast, so I tend to go on fairly long walks, especially now, on days where I'm not running. And
Mm-hmm.
Mark Evans, who's the producer on The Old Guard, and who is a lovely, very smart gentleman, and I have been having many conversations the last several weeks about if there is a potential sequel, what that sequel looks like. And these tend to be very long conversations. So I will walk, 4 or 5 miles while he and I are talking. And today's Thursday. So I think it was Tuesday. He and I were on the phone. I ended up down in I ended up on East Burnside at about 28th, which is the home of Music Millennium. And they're very good about their social distancing rules. So like I got off the phone and I went inside and I actually bought vinyl for the first time in months. So, I picked up some new Thelonious Monk. There was an album that I had missed and I was like, oh, I get this. And I picked up the Witcher soundtrack and the
Really?
new Pretenders album. And I think one or two other things as well. And then I picked up the latest Nora Jones from my daughter, who is also Dashiell has a turntable in her room. And it's normally playing show tunes or bands she likes, but I was like, well, maybe she'll like this. And she did say thank you and look pleased.
It was
Well,
very
she
thoughtful.
looked pleased. So it might have been the gesture that mattered more than the content. when I'm working, it used to be like back in college, I would put on the stereo and I would put in a CD and I would type, and it didn't matter what was on. It could be a band or it could be instrumental or a soundtrack, however you want to pick your genre, and I could work through it and work with it. And the older I've gotten, the more I've discovered that if I'm working, I can't even work to most soundtracks anymore, and that's recent. Like up until a few years ago, soundtracks were fine, and now what happens is that because what a soundtrack is is sort of the guardrails to the emotional cues of a story. And I have found myself being jarred out of what I'm doing because the emotional information I am getting from the music is in collision.
Distracting.
So I tend to listen when I'm working to either jazz that I have some familiarity with. So I can work really well to Coltrane. I can work the Monk. I can work the Miles. I can work the like Cannonball Adderley. What is it? I've just lost the name. There's a new group that my son pointed me to, and I can't remember. I want to say it's like No Bad Good, or but that doesn't sound right. I can't really work, for instance, Charlie Parker or say Kamasi Washington or Sun Ra. Those are more listening pieces. And these days, like if I'm putting on something with lyrics, it needs to be, if I'm not working creatively, like around it, I can do correspondence oddly. But I can't
Really? Okay.
work in narrative. So, and then my go-to work music is Vince Guaraldi or Guaraldi. I never pronounce his name correctly, who is best known for the Linus and Lucy theme, the Charlie Brown music, but just beautiful jazz stuff that I adore. So there you go.
Yeah. Yes. Very nice. Very nice. Yes. And so would you say though, your work music is the same as your like wind down, relaxing music, or is it completely different? Because I mean, I feel like there's a lot of overlap in kind of the stuff that you
there absolutely is. And it's, and actually when I'm winding down, I don't tend to listen to music. For me, winding down now is, I tend to be a very active music listener. So, you know, winding down is something that I do at the end of the day, right? And at the end of the day, if I'm winding down, that's normally Jen and I are in bed and we put on something that is innocuous, but vaguely engaging. So for instance, we will watch, you know, Antiques Roadshow on the PBS app. Or, you know, old Hercule Poirot's, you know, with David Suchet as Poirot, or Columbo, or something like, just something that we, something that is as comfortable as a pair of old slippers, shall we say.
Yes. Yeah. Understood. That makes sense. I know. I loved this question. And I was like, Oscar, look, we got this nice music question. And it's so funny because when I spoke with Gina, we ended up talking a lot about music as well.
As was evident. And Gina is, I mean, she's really musically orientated, you know, and it was clearly. And it's funny because when she and I were working on the Old Guard initially, she was talking about, okay, you know, there's going to be music here and a song here and so on. And I had written the thing being like, what? But music what? There's going to be what? Like it just never entered my mind in the scripting process that there would be, for instance, these music cues, right? This the Frank Ocean moment or things like that.
Yeah.
Which I suppose is a bit of insight into how the process works and what the director brings, because that's very much absolutely was her vision, right? That is her vision of it. So.
Yeah, I know. I really enjoyed talking to her about that. But I know because we talked about mixtapes, of course, with her on the podcast, because that was like a thing we kind of threw back to. But even now, Oscar and I, we really do specific playlist all the time. And when he said that, Unwind, well, that's my chill mix. And he starts naming off our favorites. Like we love Lovely Day by Bill Withers. And I love anything Jungle. But sometimes Unwind, it's weird because I want something a little angry. So we'll go to our 90s hip hop because it just like it's comforting for us, but it's not like calming.
Well, but I mean, that's.
So it's really interesting what music does,
I mean,
right?
like, look, you know, if I just want to listen to something that will make me happy, meaning, and that's actually even the wrong word. You know, I'll put on Nina Simone, right? You know, or I'll put on Billy, and or I'll put on Knopfler. I'm a huge Mark Knopfler fan, which tells you exactly how old I am. And some of those songs will make me incredibly happy, and some of them will make me wonderfully melancholic. And and I have soundtracks, for instance, that I put on that I love. Like I tracked down the soundtrack to Kenneth Branagh's Henry V, the Patrick Doyle score, on vinyl, because that was like a quest for me. I love that score. That score is one of my all-time pieces of movie music. It's up there with the Raiders score for me as brilliant.
Yeah.
So, and just, being able to listen to stuff like that will sweep me away. So.
I could see that though, while working, how it could be a distraction, even though it's melodic and there's not necessarily lyrics and stuff. If I were to write or whatnot, but when I'm working, I can't listen to anything that I have to pay attention to, right? Or that I feel, like you said, that there's an emotional draw, or I can't podcast. I have to be very focused. Like when I was in school, it's quiet. It has to be very quiet. I always find it amazing. And a lot of the kids, we're in this, back when we were all hanging out together, right? Like they're there, they've got their books, they're like studying for their exam while everyone's eating dinner. I'm like, how can you study here when there's things going on? Like I could never focus like that. That's not me.
I do actually think, because I used to be able to do that. I used to be able to write in coffee shops and be very productive.
Right. I've seen writers in coffee shops.
It is as much, I think, I suspect it is, like many things, a muscle. Like you train yourself to do it, and the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Yeah.
And I am woefully out of practice. That's part of it. But I actually suspect it may also be due in part to age. I mean, we know that brain chemistry changes as you grow. And when you are younger, you are still processing, there's a lovely, I can't remember who did it. Now I'm going to look it up. Yeah, David Eagleman did it was a PBS series in either the companion book or not. It's called The Brain, The Story of You. And it was like a 4 or 5 part thing about 5-6 years ago about, at that time, like everything we know about how the brain works. And one of the things that I came away from it with that I did not know is that newborns have something like, some incredibly large number of neural connections, more than adults do, right? Because when they come out, nothing is set. So everything is just bubbling around going, what's the information we're getting in? And as cognition becomes and personality becomes and all these things manifest more and more, those connections reinforce in certain places and they die off in others. And that's a continuing process. We know that brains are developing throughout adolescence. We know this is why, for instance, one of the reasons, look, UNC, right, this last week, we're like, oh, well, it turns out we were wrong. Let's close it down. And Jen and I were talking about the fact that, if college students can't handle it, how can we expect to control exposure amongst, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds? And that is absolutely true and fair and factual, but there's another factor in there, which is we know for a fact that adolescents have bad impulse control. It's hardwired into the head. They make poor choices, right? Because the brain is designed at that age to actually make some poor choices. It is arguably an evolutionary hangover from, you're 14, you're 16, it's time for you to go out over the hill. It is time for you to explore and so on. So you make dumbass decisions, right? Whereas most, as an adult, you go, I'm not going down there. It's dark. When you're 16, you're like, what's the worst that can happen? Well, you could die,
there's that fearless
but,
and immortal. Yeah.
And there is a reason why, quote unquote, kids think they're going to live forever. Their brain tells them they will.
Exactly.
it is not entirely an issue of conscious choice. It's an evolutionary imperative at work. So, Yeah, and we were talking about music. Okay, so
Yeah, this is why I love talking to you, because we only really need
yeah,
one question to
yeah,
get us going.
there you go.
All right, but we do have other questions. So RL Spiritual Ship asks, will your Hero Initiative writing class be recorded so they can purchase the video and help
I
fundraising?
genuinely don't know, and that's a question that you should direct to the Hero Initiative. And absolutely, and I would further say to them in that email, what would be an appropriate donation for access to that, or even suggest the donation that you would be willing to make.
Exactly.
I have no issue with them recording and using that material to raise funds for the Hero Initiative at all. So yeah, I'm all for it if that's something that Jim McLaughlin and the rest of that crew wants to do. I'm down with it.
Cool. Same listener wants to know, how do you write a great villain, especially in a world like Lazarus?
That is a really good question. And I am going to take the you in it as very specific to me, rather than how does one write a great villain. It's very hard to do it really well, because ideally you've created an antagonist who believes absolutely that they are correct in what they are doing and why they are doing it, right? And the problem one runs into is that we are in the main rational, moral, ethical members of our society to a greater or lesser degree. But there are very few things that we encounter in our lives where we go, oh yeah, I'd be willing to kill somebody over that. Crafting an antagonist who is working from an ideological point of view that justifies their actions, right, to me, it's a trick of building an argument for them that works 90% of the way there. And then at the last 10% is when they lose you. So I would use, for instance, Veronica Cale as an example, right? The idea behind Veronica Cale is this is and she was a villain I created for Wonder Woman, and she was meant very specifically and designed with an eye to, from the word go, being the foil for Diana. So the goal there was go, okay, if you're living in a world with Wonder Woman, why would you loathe and detest her? And good reasons for it, not she's a girl, right? You need to come up with something plausible. So then you find yourself looking at the character and you go, okay, well, let's say that Veronica Cale is the product of, working poor background, was raised by her mother, never had a father for whatever reason, was incredibly smart and applied herself and basically did everything that you were told to do to win the American dream, and is able to, by dint of that, and we know right there that there's a certain fiction that she got lucky enough to, get into the right university, and then to, and we are adding the fact that she is, super smart, and she makes friends with this other woman who is also super smart, and they go into business together, and she ends up creating not one but two multinationals that she runs, and she runs as a combination of an incredible business acumen and genuine intellectual capability. And she is doing these things, right, she believes this is right and proper that she do it. And she takes the money she makes and she puts it into other projects and also into the community. She is not, she wants to help others like herself. And this is a woman who is getting about 3 to 5 hours of sleep every night and who gets up to be in the gym for at least 90 minutes every morning and does public speaking and runs her company and so on. And then along comes this 6'2" supermodel who can fly with her magic lasso and says, you can be just like me, be nice to everybody. And Kale loses her shit because no, you can't. You are a liar. You are fundamentally, absolutely lying to people. They cannot be like you. Nobody can be like you. No Greek god is going to come down and bless me the way you were blessed. Nobody else got to be raised in paradise where they never wanted for anything, where they were never hungry, where they were never cold, where they never had to worry about being raped coming down the road. And you show up and you have the gall to say, follow me, I'll show you the way. And the media eats it up. And I'm over here, and this is what I've built. And I'm looking at you getting all the credit, all the glory, and being, in my opinion, a bad example. All right. I have an ideological, fundamental difference of opinion with you. Now, the villainy comes when you go, and therefore I am going to try to fuck you up.
I will destroy all. So what's interesting there is that I was going to ask you, as I heard you starting to describe, like, is it important for the villain to be likable or relatable? But from everything you described, it seems like there's that relatability.
I think your best villains are villains that you look at and you understand how they got where they got. And you can see the pain of it. So, for instance, I think Kale is much more, to use her again as an example, Kale is much more successful in the rebirth run because you see her daughter and you see how she is being abused by these gods who show up when Diana shows up. And they take her child. And yeah, you get kind of crazy. Right? And it becomes very hard to look at a parent. If you were to ask me, these are the hard questions, you were to ask me, what would you do for your son? And, my son is 20. I don't know if the answer is almost anything or anything. Right?
Yeah.
And so in the rebirth run, so much of what is motivating Kale is trying to save her daughter. And the tragedy, of course, being the traditional Greek tragedy, which is she got noticed by the gods. There's no happy ending when you're noticed by the gods. So, what Kale does to Barbara Ann, what Kale does to Ronnie, everything Kale is doing, she believes she is doing for appropriate and good reason. But she has to be self-aware enough to also, for me, one of the things that's compelling about her is she is self-aware enough to know how far she has gone. And in going that far, I want pathos for my villains. Batman villains are great for this. This is why Batman has hands down the best rogues gallery. It's why everybody loves Magneto, because you absolutely understand Magneto. You absolutely understand Magneto. You look, for instance, there's a character I never got to do anything with to my satisfaction in DC is the Penguin. Like my take on Cobblepot is that he should be Bruce Wayne, except for a flaw in his genetics and his arrogance. But he is certainly as educated, as suave, as smart, except he's short and fat and smells funny and is ugly. And the society that he desperately wants to accept him ridicules and mocks and ostracizes him instead. So, yeah, he's got something to prove. right? And this is again why Batman villains work. And this is one of the reasons why I've never understood the absolute masturbatory fascination with the Joker, because there isn't pathos there. And you can try to hammer in as much as you want, but that's a mistake. He's the one who doesn't have it. He's not supposed to. Harvey Dent is an exercise in pathos. You know, when Deanie and Burnett and Tim got us Victor Fries, they built pathos. I mean, that was the core ingredient in that character. The best takes on Poison Ivy as a villain, as opposed to what she's become now, which isn't, are pathos. You know, there's stories of a survivor's abuse and her rage at being empowered only as a result of the abuse. So you want, I think, to be able to, when you are given, and it's not necessary that you understand who and why from the start, right? But there should always be a moment when the window opens and you can see the world from the antagonist's point of view. And, you know, there's a moment in Bravo where the architect is described as getting ready for bed, right? And he's going to sleep, and he positions the pillows as if he is holding this woman he loves. And, you know, one of my dear friends, Eric Troutman, read that and he was like, that is creepy. And there's a piece of me that's like, is it? I mean, I think it's kind of sad that he is so lonely. This is the thing that he has to create in his head, right? That he is with her in these very rare moments. And it is, sure, I see the creepy. But but I also look at that and I go like, you know, haven't you ever been away from the person you've loved and gone to bed and been like, wow, I wish they were here. And you never cuddled your pillow, you know? Okay, maybe it's just me.
Don't deny it,
maybe it's
Eric.
just me. I don't know. So, you know, I mean, it's not the same as him going, and now here's my inflatable doll, and I dressed her. And,
right.
You know, I mean, that's not what he did.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I you know, it's interesting because I'm working on a Lazarus script right now, and you're going to get a lot of insight into Hawk finally.
I was just going to ask, because I was like, well, see, in Lazarus, the first, when you think of villain, like that's kind of the first one that kind of pops into your head, because you're never really on the Hawk side of things, even though Carlisle is not really.
So the thing to remember about Hawk is, and if you look at the rest of the world, with maybe the exception of Vasilovka, the rest of the world in one way or another adopted the Carlisle model. Hawk is the only one who said, I'm not doing any of that. I absolutely fundamentally refute anything that has his stink on it. So that Hawk is built. If Carlisle went left, Hawk always went right. Right? That was the goal. It was always, Hawk is literally doing a great big fuck you, Malcolm. And, you know, in 6, you're going to get an insight into why. And you may come out of it going, guys got a point.
Where he's coming from.
Guy's got a point. I'm not sure his execution is justified.
Yeah.
But I can see being really angry and really hurt and really wanting to make this man hurt and suffer. And I mean, so it isn't easy. It really isn't easy. And I would argue that it's one of the rare instances where, for me, I approach the antagonist, whatever character stuff may be in my head. You know, we've talked before about how story to me is always about character. But in the case of your antagonist / villain, a lot of the time what happens is I go, okay, I kind of see who they are, but I have to step back from character and do more fundamental work in terms of, okay, so thematically, what am I working on in this, and ideologically, what am I trying to say here? Because does this character need to be in opposition to that, right? But I would argue that you always want some level of empathy. Even in the Old Guard movie, Merrick's not wrong. I mean, he's entirely mistaken. His conclusions are in error. He thinks that he's going to be able to get the secret of immortality out of these people through science, and he's not. And the movie has said as much, because the movie an hour earlier has said, we have these dreams. Well, that's literally saying something magical is going on. There's something supernatural here, right? So Merrick is wrong fundamentally in thinking that he's going to get this, but he doesn't also have that knowledge, so you can't blame the guy. When he says to Andy, you selfish bitch, from where he's standing, she is making her life more valuable than potentially curing cancer, curing Alzheimer's, possibly creating genuine regenerative medicine, right? We're talking about spinal injuries, the end of multiple sclerosis. All of these things could conceivably, in his paradigm, come from Andy. Yeah. And if you're standing there and you really believe that, then, yeah, she's a selfish bitch, and everything he has done up to that point makes perfect, logical, even morally. I mean, I think he says in the movie, right? We are morally obligated to do this. And it sounds, on one hand, like weak, sloppy villain justification. On another, it's almost an unassailable position. If he was correct and it was something in their genetic code, he would be proven demonstrably right. And
but his execution again.
Well, and one wonders, really? I mean, really think that one through. Sure, he would end up like Apple. He would be, a multi-trillionaire. Okay?
Right.
He absolutely would monetize it. There's no question about it. But this would be out in the world. I mean, it would literally, absolutely change humanity. And is he really going too far? I mean, if it's 4 people, is that really? Now I know empirically, yes, because you're doing it against their will. They are sentient. They have emotions and feelings, and you're locking them up and you're treating them like they are pieces of wood. And that is right. In no way do we say that is justifiable. Right. But you engage, if you grant it, you have to engage it and at least answer it. So.
Of course. Do you find it easier to write the hero versus the villain?
Yes, but writing the bad guy once I understand them is more fun. Right?
Okay.
I mean, and again, it's easier when we talk in terms of, say, comics and in particular superhero comics. Rarely do I have as much fun as I am having when I'm writing Cheetah, for instance. Right?
Okay.
Because I get her. I totally get her. I get her in the older iteration. I get her in the rebirth iteration. I get this woman. And it makes perfect sense. And the ones that I really like are the ones who have no fucks to give. They're not the villains, but they're not the heroes. Like, I love Circe. Another character I never got to do nearly enough with. But Circe is this is why I thought when Denny introduced Lady Shiva, brilliant character. So yeah, it's a job. I'm following my own code. I'm doing my thing. I don't care about your morality or your morality over here. This is about me and what I want. And sometimes I will help, and sometimes I'm going to kick you in the mouth. And it will depend entirely on what I am after that day. and I like characters that keep you off balance that way. And you know, I respect the fiction of an individual who is that certain in their goals, that they also are willing to be that arrogant in their pursuit of them, right? Because a lot of the things we do because our empathy kicks in. I would really like to do that, but it would hurt people, so I won't. Right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Holding back.
So, and their willingness to be like, nah, I'm sorry. Okay. I'm actually sorry, not sorry. You know.
Yeah. It's funny because I have these guilty pleasure. I love reading like the YA novels, but I've noticed lately I've gotten very irritable about what is often the heroine character, because they always take her and make her so annoying until like the very end. And I'm just like, now I'm kind of over it, and I'm realizing I'm not enjoying these novels as much. And I was talking to Oscar, and I'm like, you know, like Atticus isn't pissing me off in this way, and neither does Jed, or, you know, like, or like when you're reading comics, like it's a very different thing. And I don't know why that formula, it's there, and it's like, well, they're teenagers and maybe they're like evolving, but they get whiny and annoying and because even like like the Hunger Games, like Katniss annoyed me, and that's why I didn't finish reading that. I was like, I don't like stories where the lead character that's supposed to be the one we are rooting for annoys me. And so maybe it's just me, but I was like, I like to be annoyed by the lead.
I'm not a huge fan of the whiner.
Yeah, I know, which is why I like your characters, because they're not whiny.
I have no problem with people screwing up or making bad decisions.
Right, flaws are okay.
But I have a real problem when they go, "Oh, I screwed up. Woe is me," as opposed to, "Oh, I screwed up. I better own it." I did this thing, and now I gotta try to make it right. So.
Yeah, that might be my Sifu personality coming through, because that's constantly my message to the kids. But it's like,
and I absolutely get it. This is the one problem, and this is where I fail most as a parent, is if my children come to me and they are upset because of X or Y or Z, I immediately want to be like, so how do we address it? Or how do you fix it? I'm really bad at going, okay, what's actually going on here is that they are needing to vent it. They're not needing to fix it. They will do the fixing themselves when the time comes. They don't need me to tell them, but I get impatient. I'm like, well, it doesn't do you any good being upset. Let's do something about it. Right. And it turns out, no, actually you need to be upset. Right. You need to be upset. I went through the roof last night because after Obama's speech, the New York Times pushed an alert to my phone that read, President Obama delivers emotional speech attacking Trump at the DNC. And you could hear me shouting out in the street. I
might have heard it from here.
I literally wanted to, and I wish I had. If I had had the presence of mind, I would have screen capped it and put it up on Instagram, asking the New York Times, "You motherfuckers, were you waiting? Have you been waiting since 2008 to use this racist cliche? Oh, we finally got the emotional, angry black man. Is that what it is? Is that what it is? Yeah. Because it is. It's fucking a dog whistle. All right. There's no question. And if it was done without consideration, then they failed. And if it was done intentionally, they can all burn in hell. Was it an emotional and impassioned speech? I watched it. It was a speech that spoke to our emotions. He was not emotional. I mean, he was not calling anybody names. you know. But
Yeah, no,
our elder statesman is suddenly, we went to a traditional racist dismissal of an African American man. And I'm sure there are people who are going to be like, "Whoa, Greg, you're overreacting." I'm like, maybe I am, but I don't think I am. Words are precise, and when you are writing a headline, that precision matters. There was a choice. There was,
and you're the New York Times. You have a responsibility.
There was a choice to use that choice of words. So, next question, because we've answered two, maybe three.
Yeah. Well, we've answered three at least. So, okay. Whitney 93545 asks, what attracts awesome comics people and also white supremacists to PDX? Is that a thing there?
So the comics,
I know there's awesome comics people.
The comics people came to Portland because Portland used to have a really great quality of living to cost of living ratio. In the late 90s and the early aughts, people hadn't really discovered Portland. And it's a beautiful city. It is a city full of books and theaters and cinemas and brew pubs and parks and nature within reach. And it wasn't expensive. You could move to Portland and live here working in comics. And then what happens is that the more people who came, the more people came. And it didn't hurt that there was Dark Horse here and there was Oni here and Fantagraphics is up in Seattle. I mean, the community was very vibrant. In the last 25 years, Portland got discovered. As Jen has put, we've had a lot of Ken and Barbies moving in, and housing prices have gone up ridiculously on top of everything else that was going on economically with the bubble. And it has become much, much harder. But that's why. And then artists congregate around other artists in the main. We want to be able to interact. The white supremacist issue is it's not a harder one to answer. It is a more complex one to answer because there are white supremacists everywhere. Saying within the city of Portland there are more, I am not certain that is true, though I am absolutely certain that, like almost every liberal city in America, there is a population where if you put their feet to the fire, the skin that peels off will reveal systemic racism that has not been addressed or even has been embraced. But the real issue comes from a couple of places. It comes from the fact that the Pacific Northwest has a lot of, the I-5 corridor is a heavily traveled, heavily populated corridor between British Columbia down to Mexico. And that's where you get the major population centers. And that's where you get the major, as a result, exchange of ideas. As you go east, and this happens in California, and it happens in Oregon, and it happens in Washington, you get less traffic. It's more rural. You're out in the high deserts. And the further east you go, the more you encounter those communities that do not have an easy exchange of ideas, that are very homogenous. And these are areas that were specifically chosen by people who had ideologies that were already either fully cooked white supremacy or were veering towards it. The survivalist community, the prepper community in the high desert in Oregon, in Eastern Oregon, in Eastern Washington, into Idaho, in Northern California, has been around a really long time. So you get this weird mix of people who moved into these areas because they wanted to be left alone, to believe what they believed and live the way they want to live. And so in some cases, those are radically liberal ideas, and in some cases, they're remarkably conservative ideas. And then you get from that all of the toxicity that comes out of it, right? Anti-government, live free or die bullshit. I don't need to pay no stinking taxes because I don't care about some kid's education, and so on and so forth. So there was a period, especially in the 90s, where you would get white supremacists / skinheads coming into Portland and stirring shit. And the response from the queer and Black and the targeted communities was, oh yeah, we're going to punch you back. And did. And the skinheads were like, well, we ain't going to Portland no more, because every time we go to Portland, we come back hurt. What has happened, of course, since the orange shit given took office, and which was primed prior, was that it made that all permissive. So we get, we're not the only, Proud Boys is everywhere.
Yeah.
So it is. I mean, the answer to the question is geography. There is a writer that my father, may he rest in peace, loved, a guy named Robert D. Kaplan, who has written several books, almost all of them pretty much about how everything in politics in the last several hundred years is entirely driven by geography. It's driven by where people were and what the land was doing, and that's what you're having here. I mean, this is the same reason why Oregon has a huge meth problem, because you can go out into the high desert and you can cook meth. It's what's going on in Breaking Bad. Nobody will smell it. So yeah, geography is a huge, huge factor.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people go, "Oh, I didn't realize there were so many. Are they just coming out of the woodworks now, or did they just start?" I'm like, no, now they've been given
the green
permission.
Flag was waved.
They've been green flag. Like, come on out with your lawn torches or whatever. Like, I don't know. I think it's a bad thing, obviously, but at the same time, it's kind of telling to know who you're surrounded by and to understand that and to be aware and to be not heightened, but it's frustrating. It's frustrating, but I think that it's been eye-opening for people to realize, like, this is who we do live amongst. Like, they've just kind of been there, but in hiding. And we've talked about this so many times with the racism, and that we know a lot of people who are very racist. You just don't realize it. And I think, I don't know, is ignorance bliss, or?
Well, no, we have the answer to that. Turns out, no, it wasn't ignorance. It was terribly dangerous.
Yeah.
And now we reap the results. So.
Yes, absolutely. So, well, I know you have other meetings today, so I don't want to keep going, because our questions are usually quite lengthy ones. So we'll be chatting again. I want listeners to remember to be reading your Atticus Kodiak novels. So you can start at Critical Space, Patriot Acts, and Walking Dead 1, 2, or 3, or all, and start sending in your questions. I already got a couple questions starting, but we probably need a couple more weeks to wrap those 3 books up. But the questions are coming in.
Let's plan for sometime in September for that.
Yeah. We have some time so that I can start compiling all those things. But it's exciting. So listeners, keep reading and let us know what you think. As always, Greg, it's a pleasure, and I am so grateful to you for these weekly conversations.
It's great talking to you.
Okay, say hi to the family.
I hope you guys have a good week. Say hi to everybody on your end, okay? And thank you, everybody, for joining us again. I don't know why you keep coming back, but I'm glad that you do.
Because it's the Mimi and Greg show.
We're gonna have to get a theme song or something.
I'm gonna get one made. We're gonna talk about this. All right. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Culture Chat, and hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe and rate my podcast. Feel free to leave me suggestions or send an email to mimi@culturechatpodcast.com, or follow me on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook.